Thank you for being here, and I'm honored to be here too, to present my research on the Playboy ransomware as a service. Ransomware is a very prevalent problem in the Netherlands and all around the world, so the Dutch police does a lot to combat ransomware operations from all around the world. And so I'm a malware reverse engineer from background, and also a city analyst. And at the Dutch National Police, we have a separate sector with around 200 people whose sole purpose is defending the organization from threats. So criminals that would have the Dutch police as a target for cybercrime. And organized crime would be very interested in what we have. For example, information about witnesses. If this leaks out, it could be very dangerous for society. I specialize in ransomware. It's a lot of fun to reverse engineer ransomware, to build decryptors, to help people recover their files. And also sometimes get asked by forensic investigators to help with disrupting botnets. And so I'm part of the threat intelligence team at the police. We are around with 7 people. And we investigate cyber threats that would have the police as target, as I said. We investigate their DTPs, how do they work, and how can we defend against them. This information we would share with the Security Operations Center, and also with other teams like the Red Team and management, of course. And the police does a lot of things, a lot of operations and initiatives against ransomware. For example, Operation Cronos a couple of years ago was to take down LockBit, to disrupt LockBit. Then we had Operation Endgame to disrupt a couple more ransomware groups and supply chain, so other criminal organizations that were in the supply chain towards ransomware groups in some form. For example, TrickBot and other botnets. And we have another thing, it's called the No More Ransom Initiative. Some of you might already heard of it. It's an initiative that was set up years ago by the Dutch police, Europol, and all kinds of cybersecurity companies worldwide, with the goal to reduce the profits that are being made by ransomware groups. And how this works, if a security researcher like ourselves finds weakness in the cryptographic implementation of a ransomware, and we are able to exploit this in such a way that we can recover the files without interacting with the attacker, then we would be able to upload this to the No More Ransom initiative, where victims all around the world can check with encrypted files and a ransom note, check if there's a chance that they can recover their files for free. In the past, I contributed a couple of decryptors to the No More Ransom initiative, and we have a lot of decryption tools from the cybersecurity sector as well, which is really great. Now, from a CGI point of view, ransomware is a really big threat to the Dutch police, as it is to probably all of you. So, as part of our activities, we track the number of ransomware victims, what ransomware victims are publicly claimed, in addition to some of the colleagues in forensic investigation that get reports from victims in the Netherlands. And the number, so to say, is really high, which is probably also to expect. But that is why we take everything around ransomware very serious. And we also help cybercrime investigations where possible. And now we we received intelligence from a third-party cybersecurity company, like some of you, that there was infrastructure, a virtual private server infrastructure was hosted in the Netherlands, and they assessed with very high confidence that it was it contained tools for ransomware as a service. So it was used to build samples, new samples for new affiliates for this ransomware group. At that point, they didn't know what it was. But they gave us the information, like, this is the IP address, it's hosted around here. And so we analyzed the information for ourselves, like, okay, how can we use this? And we shared this information with forensic investigators. They decided, okay, this is very relevant information. We will seize the infrastructure and investigate. At that point, they came back to our team and say, okay, we seize the infrastructure. There's a lot of software on here that looks like a ransomware builder and a key generator and all kinds of ransomware for different architectures and operating systems. Can you help reverse engineer the ransomware and all the tools that's in here so we can find out what it is, which time to target, and if we can do something about it. So that's what we did. And the forensic investigators, they came back to me with a package. They said, okay, here's the software. And my first thought was, this is a really great example of how ransomware as a service would work, how ransomware operators will create new samples for affiliates to set up attacks. In this case, it started off with a key generator, a very simple utility that's sole purpose is to generate a new pair of public and private key used to place in a new series of ransomware samples as shown below. Those were elliptic curve keys and probably used per victim or so even per affiliate or even per victim. Once those keys are generated, they are placed on the disk as a public and private key .bin. And then another tool is run. It's called the key replacer. The key replacer's purpose was to place the newly generated keys inside the template samples. So there were templates for the different samples, Windows, NAS, and ESXi. And the key would be placed on a specific location in the binary. So it was just configured for the affiliate to use. Then the third step was a builder tool. And the builder tool took a config.json file as input with all kinds of options to deviate in behavior of the ransomware. And the builder only targeted Windows executables, so only the Windows ransomware, which is peculiar because the other two ransomware, so the encryptors for the ESXi and the NAS architectures, they were totally different. And the builder would configure everything that's in the config file inside of the samples. And then you would end up with a set of encryptors ready to use to infect victims. So this is a technical presentation, so prepare for a lot of ITA screenshots. The first one is the key generator, which is actually really simple. It generates a new private key, elliptic curve private key, securely. And we can see that it's the curve 25519 algorithm, because the second and the third line of code, they are very typical. They trim, it's so-called secret key trimming. They trim the first and the last byte of the key. It's required by the algorithm. And then the functions in the middle, once I open them, I can immediately see this is big integer logic. So it's the computation of the public key. And when we see below, we see the public and private keys are written out to disk. And we actually didn't really have to investigate the algorithm because it's right there in plain sight. Once the keys are generated, we can continue with the key replacer. And as I said, it uses a very specific location in the memory, in the file. And this location is prefixed by a string called curve pattern. So it would just open the file, look for the string curve pattern in all 4 encryptors. It would inject the private key or the public key, depending if it's encryptor or decryptor, at that location with 2 16-byte writes. It would write the sample back, and that would be it. So 2 very simple tools to configure the first 2 steps. The next one is the config and the builder application. And the config is a JSON file with a lot of options. And some of the options are quite noteworthy to me. is the running one option. It's very important and mandatory actually for ransomware, especially on Windows. I usually do Windows research, so in this case on Windows, to test if there's exactly only one instance of the ransomware running. Because if there's not, if there's more than one, your files can be corrupted, and it might be the case that the ransomware operator or the affiliate would not have any possibility to decrypt the files themselves. So that's very important, but in this case it seems to be optional. Once the config is complete, like once the operator is satisfied with the config, then the builder tool will just open the config and ingest the config options into the resources of the Windows encryptor, which is a nice way of pre-configuring storage for the config options that can be easily and reliably updated from an external application. So it's a very clever way, in my opinion, to configure it this way. And then once the ransomware samples are built, we're going over to the encryptor. Most of the analysis was done on the Windows encryptor, because in my opinion that was the most interesting, and I will show you at the end why. The first thing they do is some anti-debugging. It's nice to see. You have a lot of basic anti-debugging stuff, like just using the Windows APIs, like is debugger present, is remote debugger present. You can also go a little bit deeper. This one is a little bit more advanced, like I would say one or two steps further. Is calling NT query information process to get a pointer to the process environment block. In the process environment block, there's all kinds of information about the process, its modules, and flags set by the loader. And at offset 188 in the process environment block, on 64-bit systems, is the NT global flag. And the NT global flag has a couple of bits set in the case of the debugger. And those are nicely checked by the encryptor. If they are set, it will start doing something else. And the second one is it checks hardware breakpoints. So in the same sense, it calls NT-query information process. Then it calls for the main thread. It calls get thread context, which means it gets a struct with the context of the CPU at that point. So pointed to the stack, the values of the registers. And inside those are also the debug registers, which contain information about hardware breakpoints. You can set breakpoints in the CPU, 4 of them to be precise, and they will trigger an interrupt if the address stored in a debug register is triggered. But you can check this by checking the CPU context and see if there's anything set in the debug registers. That's what they do. And next, talk about the encryption part, because there are multiple ways you can do file I/O on Windows. The first one, and it was the most easy one, is just doing it synchronously. So you would have a block of code. On top, you would open the file. Then you would start reading. You start reading from the file, encrypting the contents, and then write it back. And each call will wait for the previous one to complete. This is very simple, but it's quite inefficient because your threads will spend most of the time waiting for flagging for I/O to complete. So that's why there's also a different way to do this. It's called asynchronous I/O. And in Windows, you can use I/O completion ports for this. And I/O completion ports basically it creates queues, first in, first out queues that can contain messages that you send to it in regards to files that you want to read or write. So you can use the post-queued completion status function to push a new message or a new event to this queue. For example, if you have enumerated files on the file system, and you have seen a file that is, okay, like I'm going to encrypt this file, you send a message to the queue, and then you have another thread pool somewhere running, it's pulling this queue, and pulling messages and performing the actual encryption. So the encryption logic, the control flow of this logic is steered by the filling and emptying of this queue. And it's much more efficient because your threads will spend less time waiting and more time actually doing stuff. Because the encryption can happen while I/O is waiting. It's very common in ransomware these days. Most of the ransomwares that perform well, that are fast, they implement this scheme. And so once the encryption is called from the queue, and so the threads that pull, they pull from the queue, and they will start encrypting. They'll first read the file. The files are encrypted in whole, no matter how big they are. So this one is probably not a very efficient encryptor. So it reads in blocks of one megabyte, so 1024 times 1024. It will encrypt data with the HC128 algorithm, which is well, I hadn't heard of it before, but it's a stream cipher from a couple of years ago. And it takes a 32-byte key, which is generated securely. And the scheme that they are using is ECIS. It stands for Elliptic Curve Integrated Encryption Scheme. It first uses elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman to derive a new key. Then, so there's a public and private key for each file. From this key, a new key is derived for the actual encryption, and the derivation is done with a hash function, such as SHA-256 in this case. And at the end, the contents are encrypted with a symmetric algorithm. So this is exactly what is implemented. And it's used a lot these days in ransomware as an alternative to the usual RSA and AS, for example, has been used many years ago. And then all files that are encrypted by this ransomware, they contain a footer. A footer is very common with ransomware because the decryptor has to know the key required to decrypt a file once the victim would need to. So this ransomware also places a footer on the bottom of the file. And the Windows encryptor places the key in encrypted form on the bottom of the file. And they also place a checksum. And the checksum is actually used to validate the integrity of the key. It's nice because some ransomwares do. I've even seen ransomware that places entire HMACs of blocks in the file in the footer so you can validate whether the decryption was successful. That's really great because if you would write a decryptor, then your decryptor would be really good, but you can verify all the checksums. But in this case, it's only the validity of the key. And it would place a marker on the bottom of the file, and the marker would be like a signature. And in this case, it was this GUL is diffused very randomly, whatever it may mean. And something else that I had to giggle a little bit about this, is the CRC32 had an initial value of dong. And so the decryptor would also check the footer before decrypting. It would first take a look at the checksum, say, okay, if the checksum is invalid, this file is corrupt, or the key is corrupt, any of those. And it would check the marker. Because if the marker wasn't there, and it's pretty long, it's like 32 bytes, then the file would not be considered encrypted by Playboy. And now, there's a little bit of a difference between the architectures. And this has sparked my interest because I was curious to know, are those encryptors, so the NAS, ESXi, and Windows, were they made by the same author? Or how is the probability that they were? So I started looking at the other ones as well. And then I found that the Linux encryptor was significantly different. Not only because, well, it's a totally different architecture, but also the use of algorithms. Because they used Cha-Cha rather than HC128. And they had a completely different marker in the footer. The marker is the top 6 bytes displayed on top. And also the checksum was missing from the footer. So it's totally different. And the same goes for the ESXi encryptor. It did implement the the public-private key scheme, ECIES, but it used a different way, like a very native way to get random bytes. And it used the Sosa-Manuk cipher, which was an E-stream cipher from a couple of years ago. It's not so well known, but very typical because there is one ransomware that has been using Sosa-Manuk, and that's Babook. So then was time to do a little bit of threat hunting, because our goal was, can we find out where this ransomware came from? Because at first you see a couple of different architectures, so it's pretty clear that it's probably not entirely new. It's probably, the E6 IAM encryptor is taken from somewhere, Linux from somewhere else, and Windows, well, maybe they did it themselves. So therefore, to do this, we used VirusTotal. The live and retro hunting feature of VirusTotal is very useful. I love using it for investigations like this. So we created a Yara rule with some characteristics of the encryptors, and did a little bit of hunting. And we got back a couple of tens of samples, and those matched pretty quickly on Babook. Like took a couple of samples, they all matched on Babook or on another name that was based on Babook. So it was pretty clear to me that, with fair confidence, that this is Babook. The Linux encryptor did the same thing, write a Yara rule for it, and see what comes out. Also a couple tens of samples, and this was a little bit different because at one point it would say Babook, but another one would say, hey, I see the LockBit ransom node in this sample. And so I decided to open it up and see what it looks like, and indeed it contained stuff from LockBit. So then it can be different things, different reasons. Babook was leaked, and LockBit Black was also leaked. So it might be the case that someone would use the name of LockBit, a good reputation, or bad in a sense, to help extort victims. To say, I am LockBit, I encrypted your files, pay the ransom now, but actually it's not LockBit at all. And they would use the Babook encryptor to impersonate LockBit. That would be one possibility. Another one would be that they were actually related, but I haven't found any evidence of that. So, in the end, I managed to make a couple of indirections, like with well, I would say low to medium confidence, that at least the ASXI decryptor, the ransomware, was related to Babook. I'm fairly certain that is true. But for Linux, I'm not so sure. It can be either one of them. But I think it was related to Babook too, and that someone would have impersonated LockBit using the Babook encryptor. And then for the Windows encryptor, I couldn't find anything. And also, I've seen plenty of Windows ransomware in the past, and I didn't recognize any of it. So it might be the case that either they themselves or someone else developed this recently. I'm still looking into that. Yeah. And with that, I want to conclude my presentation. We at the police, we do a lot to combat ransomware, but we also need your help as cybersecurity experts, security researchers. If you ever find a vulnerability in a ransomware, and you're comfortable sharing this, because sometimes it's about a ransomware that makes a lot of like victims that are in the big game, I would say, that big companies, that they will demand a lot of money. I can imagine that those are more sensitive. If you share them with the world, then it's possible that the leaks are fixed very quickly, the vulnerabilities are fixed very quickly, and that sharing it publicly would not make any sense. But in some cases, there's ransomware that is lying under every rock on the internet. If you have any information about a vulnerability, please don't hesitate. Reach out to law enforcement, because we can use your help. Thank you for listening.